Using today's speaker, it's Dr. Bertrand Cambo. And Bertrand has been a professor here at NAU since 2015 in microelectronics and cybersecurity. He's leading research programs with the Army Research Lab and some industrial partners such as Intel, Castle Shield, and Crossbar. And we're fortunate today to have Dr. Milton Maddox here, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Castle Shield. Bertrand has 130 patents. He's an invention ambassador of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and a senior member of the National Academy of Inventors. He worked in the microelectronics and cybersecurity industry at Crocus, AMD, Gem Plus, Ingenico, and Motorola. And at Motorola, he was named a distinguished innovator and led the development of MEMS sensors, the smart MOS, RFLD MOS, and RF gallium arsenide technologies. He directed the PowerPC alliance between Motorola, Apple, and IBM. And Bertrand holds a doctorate degree in electronics from Paris-Saclay University, an engineering diploma from Suplec, and a master's degree in physics from Toulouse University. So I'd like to welcome Bertrand.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I am very, very happy to be here, to see a lot of students that used to take my classes and other faces from all over. Essentially, the topic that I want to describe is regarding quantum key distribution. And I'm not going to give a lecture on quantum key distribution. Essentially, going to present ideas to enhance it. And in particular, quantum key distributions have some limitations as far as how far you can transmit, the throughput, quantum error, and security, which means that's what the focus is. Now, because this is a pretty complicated topic, then maybe some of you are not directly familiar, I'm going to go and briefly explain what these people do, and then talk about what we're doing to enhance it. Now, I am a spokesperson of the team, and I think you have around here some of that Julie that introduced me. I need to introduce her back. She's essentially, I would say, leading a lot of what I'm going to present today. She has been a wonderful partner, at least for 6 years. She has been involved in our project. Great. And Dina are going to essentially give you a little demo on the work they did. Now we have Jan has been dealing with the complexity of the QKD equipment. And then who else do we have? I don't think we have everybody here. We have Golnaz. And Golnaz has been with us about 2 weeks, Golnaz. And she's a postdoc, and she's going to work on QKD, which means that's the team we have. Now, I cannot thank enough the help I had from several researchers from APMS. Jake, you have been working on that one. I don't see Ines, but Ines also and Ryan has been kind of actively involved. I don't see either of them.
Ines just landed in Provo.
I'm sorry about that. And I was on sabbatical at Brown University, and I've been working on some of what I'm going to present you. And to notice two researchers, Brenda Rubenstein, who may be on call, and she's essentially going to help us quite a bit on quantum error, and she's an expert on the field. And then Jeff Hofstein is the inventor of so-called lattice technology, for the one who know what it is, which is essentially modern post-quantum cryptography as mathematicians. Now, we are working on 3 main areas of focus, which is improvement of how to transfer ephemeral keys. Now, this work has been done with Jeff and Dina and Britt are going to present you what it is. It's kind of a new concept, heavily math intensive, but is working pretty well. We're working on the multi-wavelengths, which is something that we did early on with Ryan and Ines, and we have additional ID here. And then we are improving it by using what's called a two-state-based protocol. Now, you see in this picture something which has to do with space and satellite. And one of the hope I had is turned out that QKD now is going to become more and more implemented through ground to satellite, satellite to satellite, an area we know nothing, but at NAU we have expertise there, and hopefully we can partner on the field. Okay, I'm going to summarize what it is. The technology so-called BB84 has been invented in 1984. Additional mode has been by using the so-called EPR methods has been developed, but the BB84 seems to be more easy to implement. The E91 is based on entanglement, and you send entangle photons, and as you know, this is not easy to do. Commercial QKD exists. Fiber connections can go to 200 kilometers, which is quite good. Ground satellite to satellite link exists. To give credit to our Chinese scientists colleagues, they have been leading that effort. Now, one of the technology that is important is called decoy. And in this case, rather than sending photons, you send multiple of them in different magnitudes. And you can see here on the graph that the decoy, because you send a more powerful signal, trying to go further on. But of course, there is a challenge on security because the single photon is always more secure than multiple of them. Working okay. Now, to notice that NSA has not been very helpful recently in the forward. They have been kind of a cold feet. It's not easy to get firm. And the end result here is if you look at this is a few years, but it's still the case. If you look at quantum key distributions, which is yellow, this is how much patent China has, and this is how much patent we have in the US. Now, on quantum computing, this is kind of the opposite. We have more, but obviously the NSA believe that there is still a lot of work to do, and they are not wrong, and this is why we are doing what we do. Now, this is the summary how the architecture is working, but essentially you have a quantum channel, and in this quantum channel we're going to have polarized photons, and that is essentially going to allow us to transmit a stream of photons translating into a stream of bits. And then from that information, we are going to use a normal network to finalize the key distributions, which that sometimes people confuse. They believe quantum key distributions through the quantum channel. Well, that's actually a combination of the quantum channel plus what you send online. And then when you essentially get your key through the network, you use additional cryptography. That's essentially the big picture. Now, as I was alluding to, one of the big issues you have on that technology is the quantum decoherence, which is essentially the phase shifting, creating error. And you have here a quite recent paper that essentially is injecting noise, and you can see that the distance is dropping because the information you send is less when you put more noise. Now, our approach is trying to deal with noisy environment. And that's the innovations that we are doing here at NCI, be able to handle noise. we don't resolve the fundamental problem, but we find a way to live with it, we think, better than not. By the way, what I'm going to present here, some of that may be complicated. Don't hold your questions for the end. Okay? You have a question, you stop me. Don't be shy. Okay, which means I'm going to start by presenting QKD and then 3 IDs, subset protocol, multi-wavelengths, and two-state QKD. Which means, how that works? You are going to have a stream of random number that you want to send. And then those are going to activate a source of single photons. And the photons that we create are going to be essentially non-polarized. And then after that, they go through polarizations. And then we have a second random number generator, and we're using 2 bases. And we either polarize at 0 degree, 90 degree. In this case, the 0 degrees, we want to send a 1, and the 90 degree, we want to send, sorry, the 0 degree, we want to send a 0, and the 90 degree, we want to send a 1. And here, if you get, let us say, you send a 1, and if the base is a plus, then you're going to send a photon or line at 90 degrees. Then the second base is a 45, 135 degrees. And in this case, if you want to send a 1, this is going to be 135. If you want to send a 0, this is 45. Which means each bit here is going to be translated into a photon with one of those 4 orientations. And you see here an example of transmission. And here, this is what you get in. The base is random, and then you get your photon. And in here, I look at the quad-bit orientation. And I'm using here those 4 orientations, and I call that 0 and 1. And then those 2 are essentially the Adama converter. That's essentially the way that works. And you can see here, you are sending one of those 4 quad-bits. At that point, you go to satellite. This is one of the work done by Chinese, satellite to satellite. And then at the receiving end, there is something that counterintuitive that we're going to take. The receiver has no idea of what was the base that was used to transmit a particular photon. And the transmitter is going to use a random base from a second random number generator, which means half of the time we're going to be looking at the same base. And then the other half is going to be a mismatch. When we have a mismatch, as you know, we have going to have a 50-50% chance for the 2 phases because we are always oriented in the middle. In here, the single photon detector is going to see that, and that is going to create a data stream. That's the setup. Now I'm going to do the analysis, but that's the setup. Any questions on that one? Now, when you analyze that, I remind this is the transmissions. And I put here in this graph at the very top the input. Then I put the first base. Then you can see the orientations of the photon. It is important here to know the position. 1, 2, 3, and so on here. You know, typically here in QKD, we're going to say 10,000 of it. That's a typical number. It will be more. But 10,000 is a typical number. And then you see the photon that we get. Now, on the receiving end, like we say, this is random. And we know that when the 2 are aligned, then the read is going to be accurate. Which means, as you can see here, I did totally random here. You can see here some of the positions you get what was transmitted. And then the other one could be the same, could be the opposite. But in this protocol, we don't care. Because what's going on when they are done, the two parties are going to exchange the positions of their random number, and they are going to know after the fact which one are matching. And then you can see here, the position 2 is matching, the positions 4, 5, 6, 9, 11, 12, which in here you put that. This is the list of the matching positions. And then you know what was sent on those positions. Okay? Now, when you are done with this analysis, again, you're talking about 10,000, now you get about only 5,000 left, because half of them are the mismatch, right? And then, what you do here, assuming that you want to transmit the key 101, then what you do, Bob, Alice, say Bob, look at the positions 2, and then 5, and then 9, and then 11. Because 2 is a 1, 5 is a 0, 9 is a 1, 11 is a 1. So here you send the key. Right? Now the key here that I put is 4-bit. You know, practically the key, you want 256 of them if you want to use cryptography, but the method is the same. Now what is cool in this method, the positions, for example, 2, 4, 6, 9 also give the same key. Now, your positions don't have to be in the order. You can put the order you want. Eventually, you have a very large number of ways to transfer the same key or other keys. And when you are done with the transfer, you essentially can get it all together. Now, I was planning to do this QKD introductions in about 15 minutes. I'm done with the 15 minutes. I'm going to start with the presentations. Pause a second. Any comment here? Are we okay? If you're not 100%, it's not too bad. You need to have a general idea of what we're talking. Okay. Are we this time? Okay, listen. Here we understand the QKD. Now, before I go to the next step, in QKD there is what's called Eve. Eve is going to try to intercept. But Eve, during the transmissions, has no idea if she should use the base plus or the base multiplier. She's going to have also a random number. But then what's happened, if she observes it and she's misaligned, she has a 50% chance to split the information. Because in quantum physics, you cannot observe without disturbing. Those photons, when you're going to observe it, will be disturbed. Which means the way the technology is working here is you are going to exchange certain numbers. If I want to send 5,000, I'm going to take 1,000 that I sacrifice. I'm going to use it for QKD, but I'm going to transfer the information in the clear, trying to see what is my error rate. And then if I have an attack, the error rate is higher. But this is cool because in traditional technology, if somebody spy, you don't know. Here you know. That's what it's doing. Okay, now I'm going to move to our research work. Okay. The objective of this protocol that I'm going to describe is to be able to handle noisy channels. Here, with Jeff, the mathematician from Brown, we developed a so-called challenge response mechanism, which I'm not going to go into very detail here, but in a nutshell, as you can see here, in the traditional QKD, after you are going to work like the BBA. You do everything the same. When you are done with it, in the current BBA4, you have to share the two random numbers to be able to sort out the zeros and one. In this case, you're going to have a third random number double. And this random number, which we can call a challenge, is going to produce responses that are going to be the same on each side. But on the mathematical standpoint, what is cool if you want to share a key, you are going to filter your informations, then you send that to the QKD channel, and then you can recover it, in spite of the fact that you have a hard noise on the channel. Which is the beauty of that protocol is you can actually live, you can exist with a lot of decoherence. Now, current QKD is starting to get in trouble when you get more than 10%. That's bad, because then you don't know how to handle that. In this particular case, we find out that we can actually disturb 40% of the photon and still get information back. And that's essentially what we get. And again, for the one interested, we'll be very happy to go to the detail on that one, but that would be too. Yesterday, I was starting to discuss that as well. I think completely, that was too complicated for this meeting. We don't want to essentially have Q&A and so on, but you have to believe me here. That protocol is working beautifully. And then if you want to quantify what that mean that when we have the rate of erratic bit in the quantum channel, the share key is going to have this type of error rate. Which means the working point, for example, that you are looking is here. There's a 40%. You have about few parts per million of error in your transmitted key, which is very easy to get here. Really easy. In this case, in this protocol here, there's a graph here has been validated experimentally, and Dina and Rick has been kind of, I'm going to show you that is working. But that essentially a protocol, which, and if you essentially look at the situations here, is first of all, you have two-way authentications, which is not the case of TCP. One of the weaknesses of TCP is the lack of two-way. How did you know that this is globalized? You can have a fake Bob, and in this case we know it. We can retrieve the key. The experimentation is validating. However, this is creating a headache, which essentially, if you have that method, I was already explaining that if you have an email attack, your error rate is getting high. Well, but if you correct it, how are you going to know that it is here? And this is what the solution that I'm going to present right now. Which means, I just remind you, this is on every book here, but this one you have Alice basis, and then Bob, and then in between you have Eve. And what you can see here is that Eve, when you have Eve, she's going to create a level of error. And the first thing we want to know is how much error are we talking about? That one is trivial to find. And I just here for the base plus, you can do it for the base multiply the same way. But when we don't have Eve, if we send the 1, we receive a 1, right? But if we have interceptions with a misaligned base, which is 50% of the case, because if sometimes it's going to be aligned, sometimes it's going to be misaligned, then you flip, and then when you observe, you have 50% of chance to get back to a 1, which means your error rate is actually 25%. Okay? I was explaining to you that you know to filter 40%, and now I'm telling you that when you have if, you create only 25%, which is obviously an interesting result here. Which means, on the other hand, when you have decoherence, you essentially have, let us say, if alpha is 25%, then it means that you get the same result, which means that fundamentally 25% decoherence and 25% is equivalent to an attack. You never know if this is because the quantum channel is corrupted or yes.
So for your decoherence, I was just wondering, Are you modeling after like a G-polarizing channel? Is that?
I know it's going to this kind of day. This is what the colleague from Brown will start to work on now, precisely looking at which type, so on and so forth. And right now, we're looking at the very abstract theoretical error correction results mentioned in polyatory. We will do this kind of work next. That's a good question. Okay. Then I essentially want to do the computations. What's happened if you have A dropping in alpha decoherence? And it turned out, for the sake of time, I'm going to save your time, but the equations is here, which in the resulting error rate is alpha plus O5 divided by 2. It's quite trivial here to do. You just go to all configurations and you get that one. Which means we got into that graph, and that graph is the difference of decoherence with and without an attack. Which means that, let us say, if you have 30% decoherence, you are going to have 10% more if you have even. In the protocol is the following. If you essentially, let us say, I'm going to transmit a QKD to gate, and I'm going to be able to calibrate my channel, and I'm going to know my decoherence level. And then when I do my transmission, I measure my error rate, and then if my sensitivity is there, then I can. That's the way it is. It's quite straightforward equations. Now we have to notice here that in this case, the highest level of decoherence at the bottom is 50%. If you get 75%, that's 50%. If it's 50%, it's the worst. Okay, now this is I pause a second. I was essentially explaining how this new protocol allows us to operate under those conditions, which means us, we are going to prove that experimentally, and we are going to essentially study what type of error, like we mentioned. Now I'm going to switch to the second topic, which is using multi-wavelengths. Now, this graph is has been actually originated by Ryan. We started to work together like 2 years ago. But the idea here is you're going to, the top one is the BB84. And here you're going to use 2 different lasers, and you're going to use a mux. And then you're going to have your channel that can transmit the photons of either wavelength. Which means, in the protocol I'm going to show you in a second, for every photons, you can have 4 orientations, 0, 45, 90, 100. And then you can have 2 different wavelengths. And that gives you twice the number of quantity to send, which in this case, rather than sending bits, we can send quadrants. I'm here talking about the quaternary, not the continuous form. Quadrants. With the same speed, if you get X amount of photons a second, that is going to double the throughput. Okay? Now, here the protocol, I try to make it as simple as possible. But if your base is a plus, and if you want to transmit, the quadrate is 0, 1, 2, 3, the 4 elements. If you want to essentially send a 0, you are going to have the 0 degree element of the first element. You want to send the 1, you get 90 degrees. You want to send the 2, you're going to use the second element. And so on and so forth. You see here mapping as a function of the quadrit I want to send, the photon I use, and then you see the qubit with definitions we have, and then the wavelengths we use. That's the protocol. Now, for example, if we have this stream of bits, 1 0 is a 2, 1 1 is a 3, right? That first step is easy. And then here, you can actually have your random number picking the plus or the multiply, and then you do the same. Now here, this is an example of transmissions, and you can see here on the top, you have your bits. The second line, you have the quadrits. The third line is your first base, random number. Then you see what you send. Then on receiving end, you have your random base. Then if you have a mismatch, you don't care. You only look at your match. Then you get back the same number, and you put that in bits. Which is, it is working like the BB84. You said the same number of points. But it is working like the BB84. Now, if you essentially look at that is actually a beautiful feature, but I'm going to focus on that one here. If you send a 0 0, and if you have decoherence, the worst case you can have is to only 1, because your 0 can be transmitted. Rather than reading a 0 degree, you can read a 90 degree. But you cannot be confused with the wavelengths. If you send, you observe a group, and if you get an error, what you know is your first bit is accurate. You see, your second bit is erratic. Which means right there, if my decoherence as far as the photon is concerned is alpha, my bit error rate is going to be alpha divided by it. Which means if you need, let's say, if your error corrections can work for a particular degree of bad bit, you can actually go much further. Right there, you enhance the distance you can go. See, you see the value of that one? Just not only I double my throughput, twice the number of bits, but I cut the impact of the decoherence in half. So that's the two advantages. You see, it comes here by using that method, but for instance, with the experiment. By definition, you calculate the error in half. Now, if you keep doing it, you're going to believe me because it's quite. If I go to my same graph here, what do I have? If you have Eve, rather than having 25% error rate, you're going to have 12.5%. Huh? That's half. Your bit error rate is half, and that gives you that graph. In this case, everything is cut in half. That's it. Which means that the value of that method is double throughput, bit error rate in half. Now there is an extra cost because you need two sources. But in the QKD, what's expensive is the quantum channel. If you use a satellite, you know the cost. The single photon is going to cost a few percentage of the entire things. But the transmission channel is the same, which means in this case, we can actually cut the cost to transmit the bit tremendously. That's the idea, which is yes.
I was going to ask, in this, why stop at just 2 wavelengths?
Ah.
4, would you
This is what,
Then you have to get-
you know who I am? This is what I am. And in my presentations, I have a presentation that is done, and it's key. The realize quickly that we need to see how well these nuts work. How to see the air weight into the nuts. We need to experimentally validate it. If the mass is very low, then we need to do what you say. Now, the things that we can put also is to the wavelengths to cross each other. Then you're going to have, you're going to be electrically picked up in order to do. You see, this is part of the research effort, but you're right, in theory we can go further. But it is an exciting commercial opportunity here to potentially use the same channel. That's my second. Now I'm going to switch to last, but not the least. Now that one is going to delight the mathematicians in the room. We're going to do something. We're going to use a protocol where we mix two different states. And we're going to use, in this case, ternary state and quaternary state. Treats and quaternions. Now, the quantum channel that I just described is handling quaternions, which means we already talked about, which is in this protocol, what I'm going to do, I'm going to share, and I can use path, I can convert that to things, but I'm going to share a nouns expressed in quaternions. They are not in quaternions, you can go into quaternions. And then I'm going to add that to my incoming stream, and the incoming stream is going to be a stream of trees. Okay? Now, when you add, we're going to use a mod 4, which means that we're only going to send 0, 1, 2, or 3. Right? And for each trees that we're going to send, we add the quadric. Then we get the quadrant. We send that to the quadrant channel. Then when we receive it, we're going to add 3 times the same quadrant. And as you know, when you have 3 times plus 1, that's 0, and we get x bar. In this protocol, you can actually use the y in the middle to use the channel that we discussed, the two wavelengths, and you get the same on both sides. But before I go to the next slide, is it convoluted? Not enough, not enough. Okay, but here's the beauty. When you have an error, beta, then you have your decoherence, whatever it is, which means your quadratic is going to be different. Then if you look at the equations, it turns out that you're going to get the x plus the same beta. And I think I did a little mark here, but z star is z plus beta. Then you had 3y. That is essentially z plus beta plus 3y, and then you replace z bar by x plus y, and the y and the 3y cancel out, and you get right? Everybody's okay on that? Little math, not too nasty, right? Now, here why I like it. You remember what I told you? That you can only, the 0 can become the 1 can become the 0, 2 can become the 3, or the 3 can become the 2. Now, what is the beta when we switch from 0 to 1? First one, right? You get 0 in, you get 1 out, that's 1. When you get 1, what do you get out? That's 0, which is minus 1, which means the beta can only be 0 -1 or +1. You cannot have 2. Right? And then you can see here, when you send 0, you can flip 0 to 90 degree or 45 to 135 is +1. Right? Which means at the end of the day, the Z you receive is either, when you have decurrence, is either 1 level up, 1 level down, depends of if you are a 0, 1, a 0 or 2, which is a plus, or 1 and a 3, which is a -1. Now, when I have that, I have this beautiful computation here, which means when I get, this is the X I'm starting. Now, I will not be offended. Some of you say that's too much detail, but I'm almost done. Believe me, after that, this is the demo here. You can have actually, if you have a 0, you can actually have a beta of -1 or 0 or 1. Now, if you get -1, your state of -1 turns out to be 3, right? Mod 4, -1, 3. Which means if you send a 0 and if you have a -1, you get a level 3. Right? Now, when you send a 1, you're either going to get a 0, 1, or 2. But then if you get a 2, and then you get a +1, you get also a 3. Which is what you have here, you send trees, and you get quatrains. But the state 3 is due to decurrence. And if you look at the math here, this is alpha divided by 2, which means, amazingly enough, the probability to flip a photon alpha, assuming that the probability is alpha, the probability to observe the phase 3 is alpha divided by 3. Now, why is it cool? This is really cool. And I will try to share with you my excitement. Assuming that we send 10,000 trees, when you have no error, you only observe trees at the end. But if you have decurrence, you're going to be able to count state 3. Now, Bob and I don't have to discuss. Bob is going to look at, because in the BB84, you have to correlate. Say, hey, where are your positions and exchange or this kind of thing. Here, all you do, you count your state 3. Now, what is also beautiful, in the BB84, let us say you have 5,000, and you have to sacrifice 1,000. Here, you don't have to sacrifice, you read to 5,000, which is your statistical analysis. Now, based on this, again, if you have not totally grasped on my stuff, it took me a long time to get there. Don't feel bad. But the bottom line is these equations, which means with and without decurrence, you can actually see the difference between an attack and a non-attack, like we did before. But the difference here is you get your measurement of 5,000 directly by the state. That's what's cool here. That's the protocol here that I wanted to share with you. And that's the last slide. The two-state-based QKD, we have a third state where we can measure the error without data exchange. It's a two-way authentication. And of course, the throughput here is not twice, it's 50%. Because if you just compute your throughput, Now, I was essentially showing you how you can start with strips, in quatrains, but you can start with bits. As long as you have 2 different units, is the key. And now, Dina, this is your turn. and Brit. Yeah, as they are already here. If I summarize the entire story, we can actually use the first methods of noise management. Then we can also use big and then we can move to the state. That is in the end of the 90s.
Yeah.
That was everything is they are not mutually exclusive. You need to disconnect me and take it from, yeah, you have the, is it that? Yeah, that's it. Look at that. Yeah. Sadly, those two are going to be. Expect them to, the two of them to speak soon.
So this for okay. So we've implemented these protocols that Bertrand has talked about in our sort of proof of concept hardware, but we've been having trouble getting the full size system set up. But that would be our ultimate goal, is being able to implement all of these protocols in the full size system, which hopefully with Golnaz's help we'll be able to do. But for now, we've been working on a sort of software simulation, and Dina has one that she's created, and she's going to demo that.
Yeah, so we have some input parameters in this demo, which defines, so
My glasses here.
Okay.
yeah, so let's say I choose 512 for the length of the chat, responses. And the error rate, we can choose like 40%. And for now, I'm gonna do like no if to see how the system works. We have Alice. She wants to send all these quadrants, and she has her random basis. Then she encodes each quadrant to one wavelength and the angle, and she sends it over. Bob receives it based on his base. And now when Bob filters the matching bases, he gets something like this, which has 2s and 3s. So this number of 2s and 3s should be the number of error divided by 2 when we don't have any if in the channel. So he calculates that he gets this 19.77, which is close to 20%. So he can conclude that the communication was safe, and he proceeds to recover the ephemeral key, which is very fast, and in this case, it was successfully recovered the 40% noise. And so I'm going to show how it works with Eve. So Alice, again, she does the same encoding and sends the quadrants over, and Eve is in the middle. She's gonna add some error to the channel, in addition to that 40%. Bob is going to receive it, and when Bob calculates the number of 2s and 3s, you can see that it's more than 20%, and it increased. So he can conclude that Eve was in the middle of this communication, and they stop the communication, and they just start over. So yeah, it just
What is cool here is they put all those random numbers and using random numbers. Then we find out that the little equations of which is how we can do it. They actually predict that we cannot not to see the window going on. That's source of quantum error, we're going to sense a look at standard deviations, and we see how the it's working. So this is what our research is about. It will take us, a long time to put all the things together. But this concludes our talk, and we have, I think, a few minutes for questions.
Lori's up.
Yes.
So,
At that last demonstration there, before you was acting, the error was like something like 19%, but then it went up. So you know what that error rate would be, like just as a baseline.
Yeah, the way it is here, like I said, assuming that I have my quantum channel between here and gate, I'm going to calibrate, what kind of recurrence you have and statistical variations. And I'm going to have a variation, a distribution of what kind of recurrence I have. And then what we know is the 22%, 0.7, whatever it is. If the decoherence, the standard deviations is narrow enough, then we can walk at 40%. If not, then we need to back off to 35% or to 30%. So that means that what we need to do is experimentally try to see what, as a function of the real noise variations, how far we can go. This is essentially the tool that we have prepared is going to allow us to do a lot of modeling of, knowing the model of the quantum error, we're going to plug that in, and we're going to find out with this kind of error, maybe we can go to 28%, and in this one we can go to 38, and so on and so forth. And this is essentially what our model is going to allow us to do. And I was very excited because we think we have the methodology here to tackle the experimentation. I'm working at a theory people, and now we have the experimentalists joining us, with Gonas, and then we're going to, working with our colleagues from Brown and others that want to work with us in the physics department, we are going to tackle these kind of things and get answers. Excellent question. Yes.
So from my understanding, so for that last demo, 19% or 19.7, that's half 40%, so that's roughly.
Exactly. This is we really be expecting that, because everything is random, we have to vary around.
Right, and so the 22 is pretty close.
It's not enough. So
So
this is on purpose because 40% is incredibly high.
right.
Okay, so we're pushing at the limit of the limit. If you look at the graph, 40% is when you start to lose it. It's low, but if you have a very long stream, let us say if I send you 100,000 photons, the 2% is not that small.
Right.
Depends on what kind of, what is the length of the database you have to quantify the error. See, that's the point. You have to optimize, the standard deviations with the length and blah blah blah. It's and truth be statistical analysis.
So in order to get that deviation is actually complete through the physical model.
Yeah, exactly. You are, and that's why we are welcoming students here that would be interested to work with them, physicists and so on. And this is kind of there's a lot of things to do here on that work. We have a model. I think the model, the math appears to be sounded. The story of building the experiments out of that. So, there is something, and then I will do this very because now we think we are. That's one of the reasons now we need physicists with real substance to be able to.
So would you expect that you would need to keep that number secret? Would someone be able to put together an attack based on knowing the actual percent error that is expected on that channel?
There's a lot of fluctuations of information. And I don't have an answer in some cases. The opponent we know, they have a model. If they are looking at, if gate is 50 kilometers away, we're going to have a different model, it's 400 kilometers. That's, if you're trying to communicate at very long distance, the hackers, they all have a higher chance of training than the short. There's, the implementations important.
That seems pretty hard to try to, you're trying to control error rate fidelity in the middle and say, okay, no, I got 20, I'm gonna shoot for 20, that's.
The point is,
Break it
the
down.
point is, this will do what we are showing, which says 40%, because they don't have to go there. But just tell you to say, million photos, I'm going to probably be able to detect, I don't know, we need to optimize those things. Why not the technology to work on both ends? If you do something working at 25%, the able on the 40% is to push the envelope to the no, but they are showing you that what they already did, but more than like you say, 19.7 versus 14, that's not bad, and it's not before, which is the experimentations that we did is pretty much in line with the model. That's the
Okay.
Have a fantastic researcher.
I think
Yeah, if some of you are interested by the war, they are very interested in both is ideology and people practice. That be more.
we talk about our today's speaker.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.